Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last 4 years, more than 16,000 Canadians have died from opioid overdoses. During that time, Dominic Barton, the Liberals' hand-picked ambassador to China, was turbocharging OxyContin sales, even providing rebates for drug overdoses. Dominic Barton was a managing partner with McKinsey, which is accused of shady deals with China, destroying evidence, and stoking the opioid crisis. Before naming him to key positions in the Liberal government, did the Prime Minister know of Mr. Barton's role in the opioid crisis?
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I will not comment on that question, but I will say that Dominic Barton is an extraordinary ambassador for Canada, given his vast experience with China, and Canada can be assured that we are well served by his very hard work in Beijing on behalf of all of Canada.
Honourable Member for Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals can't avoid this question. McKinsey, the company that Mr. Barton worked for, is in the process of settling lawsuits over advice it gave to drug companies to aggressively bolster OxyContin sales. In fact, the OxyContin manufacturer has pled guilty to criminal charges, including bribing doctors, deliberately contributing to the opioid epidemic. Again, did the Prime Minister, was he informed of the role that Dominic Barton played in turbocharging the opioid epidemic?
The Honourable Minister.
And again, Mr. Speaker, I will say exactly the same thing. I will not comment on those allegations from my colleague, but I will say that Ambassador Barton is doing an extraordinary job on behalf of Canada in Beijing to help build our relationship with an important country, China. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
When the Prime Minister took office, he told us that deficit financing would boost growth. But in 3 of the 4 years that followed, per capita GDP growth has been zero. In fact, and that was before COVID. And in fact, the last 5 years of per capita GDP growth have been the worst since the Great Depression. The government went ahead and asked for $700 billion more of borrowing authorizations, and since then the IMF has downgraded growth projections for Canada by a third, below the U.S., the Eurozone, the average of the advanced economies. When will they realize that you can't put economic growth on the national credit card?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank the Honourable Member for the question because it gives me the opportunity to congratulate Canadian businesses on their resilience. Our GDP increased 0.3% in December, nearly twice as much as the consensus forecast. And our fourth quarter GDP increased 1.9%. That's an annualized rate of 7.8% and nearly twice as much as the Bank of Canada's forecast. COVID is tough for our economy and our businesses, but they are doing a terrific job.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
Well, in addition to dragging down growth, government borrowing risks driving up inflation. According to CIBC's economist Avery Shenfield, additional government spending being offset by the earlier need to hike interest rates to contain inflation. End quote. Mr. Speaker, higher interest rates would be a disaster for the households, businesses, and governments whose combined debts are almost 4 times the size of our entire economy. Higher interest rates could collapse our economy. Why is this government risking our economic future on credit card debts instead of securing it with paychecks?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is that our government's policies are working. They are supporting Canadians and Canadian businesses in a very difficult time. And let me quote David Parkinson in the Globe and Mail. I quote, examining economic data of 2020, there's no question that the federal government's emergency income replacement programs were a critical lifeline for Canada during the pandemic. We would have plunged into a much deeper economic hole without them. That's true, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to continue supporting Canadians and Canadian.
L'honorable député de Lac-Saint-Jean.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. This government says that it doesn't need the Bloc. Well, last week all parties joined their voices to the leader of the Bloc Québécois. to ask the government to grant citizenship to Raif Badawi. All parties, including the Liberals, asked the Minister of Immigration to use his discretionary power to make him a citizen. That will make it easier for this political prisoner to access consular services and will enable Canada to undertake further measures to free him. Will the Minister of Immigration take note of this Chamber's unanimous request and make Raif Badawi a Canadian citizen? The Honourable Minister.
L'Honorable Ministre.
The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, le Canada...
Mr. Speaker, Canada will always defend human rights everywhere in the world. Canadian officials will continue raising his case at the highest levels. We will request that clemency be granted to Mr. Badawi, and we hope that he will soon be able to join his family. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. That wasn't the question, Mr. Speaker. When the Minister of Foreign Affairs was in opposition in 2015, he wrote that the eyes of the entire world will be placed on Canada to ask that the government use all diplomatic means to request Raif Badawi's freedom. And the Prime Minister in 2015 said that it was time to act. Well, today, the Liberals are in power, and all parties are asking them to make Raif Badawi a Canadian citizen. At the time, the Liberal opposition spoke a lot on this subject, and now that these same Liberals are in government, will they finally take action? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, and I'd like to thank him for his hard work on this important matter. This motion shows Canadians' concern about the unjust detention of Mr. Badawi. We will continue to work closely with all parliamentarians to attempt to reunite Mr. Badawi with his family. And while we are talking about human rights, when will the leader of the bloc apologize to the Minister of Transport for his remarks? Thank you.
Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, 50,000 jobs. 50,000 jobs on both sides of the border are at risk if the Prime Minister doesn't take serious action to save Line 5. Enbridge has been issued new permits by the Michigan government to make a safe project even safer by encasing the existing pipe in a tunnel along the bottom of the Straits of Mackinac. The Natural Resources Minister has pledged his support. Will the Prime Minister commit to speaking with President Biden about the importance of saving Line 5?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I thank the honourable member for her question. She and I have been speaking about this. This is obviously hugely important, not only for her riding, but as she mentioned, for Canadian industry. We are working alongside Ambassador Hillman and Foreign Counsel General.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, Conservatives have supported from the start emergency funding to help the pandemic unemployed, buy groceries, pay rent and mortgages. Yesterday, a 21-year-old Kingston student boasted in the New York Times that he made $9,000 by making a highly speculative investment of his CERB dollars in a stock market play. Mr. Speaker, given that emergency support will be necessary for many more months because of the Liberal vaccine shortfall, how can they explain easy cash for stock market play, even as thousands of other Canadians are still denied funds to survive?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when Canadians needed support the most, the CERB was there to help over 9 million people pay their bills, support their families. It was there to support workers who weren't able to work because of COVID. If an applicant was over 15 years old and met all the other criteria, yes, they were able to receive the benefit. We made every effort to support as many Canadians workers as possible, including young Canadians. Many young people work to help support their families, while others live independently and have bills to pay. We are not going to apologize for helping young people, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, many deserving Canadian companies are also still denied emergency support, like a Thornhill firm, Fleet Coffee, which launched a new business just before the lockdown. A large facility was leased, 5 mobile coffee shops acquired, commercial agreements signed, and staff hired. But because it had no previous year revenues, Fleet Coffee has been denied access to the wage subsidy, rent subsidy, and credit availability programs. Mr. Speaker, do these Liberals see the inequity of the denials of these flawed programs?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my very respected colleague for raising this important question. When we created the emergency relief programs for businesses, it was very important for us to bridge as many businesses as possible through the pandemic. And we also knew that we needed to balance that urgent need for support with the creation of programs that have real integrity. Finding that balance can be a challenge, but I am very aware of the challenges that new businesses face, and this is something we're looking at closely.
Okay, I just want to take a moment and ask everyone who's joining us virtually, the arm on the headset, if it is exactly in front of your mouth, there's a popping sound. It doesn't bother many of the people in the chamber, but it's very hard on the interpreter's ears. So if you can just make the headset either a little bit below where your mouth is or above, you don't get that popping sound, and it would save the ears of our interpreters. We certainly don't want to injure them. The Honourable Member, l'Honourable Député.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, when a Canadian loses their job because of COVID, the Prime Minister tells them to turn to EI, and if they don't qualify for that, apply for the CRB. It's like asterisk asking for an A38 permit in the place that sends you mad, Mr. Speaker. If you have to apply for EI and don't qualify, when you turn to the CRB, you're automatically turned down because you applied for EI. Can the Minister of Employment find the right window to talk to the Minister of Revenue so that Canadians who are entitled to assistance can actually get it? The Honourable Minister.
We know that this continues to be a difficult time for many, which is why we transitioned to a simplified EI program and created 3 new recovery benefits. Service Canada and the CRA work together to share data on Canadians who apply to ensure that only one benefit is paid to someone at any given time. And in some instances, yes, this integrity measure can cause a delay. But we understand that any delay in receiving benefits can be hard for people. So we're continuing to work on this to ensure that Canadians get the benefits they're entitled to in a timely manner.
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians have been asking this government to act on travel, especially with new strains of the virus threatening efforts to bring the pandemic under control. But while this government stalled, thousands of international flights landed in Canada. With the latest announcement, we again see the government saying the right things, but introducing half measures that won't keep Canada safe. Why are flights from known hotspots for new strains not being suspended? Why are even popular sun destinations like Florida missing from the list? And when will this government get serious about travel?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you to my colleague for his question, and I'm surprised he's calling some of the strictest rules in the world to be half-measured. Let me remind my colleague that since March of last year, we asked all Canadians to cancel non-essential flights. We banned foreigners. We implemented a 14-day quarantine. And earlier this year, we've added a pre-boarding test that is necessary prior for anybody to arrive into Canada. And last week, we've announced further layers to restrict discretionary travel. So those are important measures that are protecting the health and safety of Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Newmarket, Aurora.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To guarantee a better and healthier Canada for future generations, we must start taking action to protect our environment now. Our government has recently announced an ambitious climate plan to do exactly that. Can the Minister of Natural Resources update this House on the government's plan to plant 2 billion trees over the next 10 years?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Honourable Member for his question. In December, we launched our plan to plant 2 billion new trees. The first of these trees are going to be planted this spring. Our plan increases annual tree planting in Canada by 40%. It permanently increases forest cover by an area twice the size of PEI. We're working with provinces and territories, Indigenous communities, NGOs, municipalities to get this right. Mr. Speaker, trees matter. They clean our air and water. They lower our energy costs. They improve our biodiversity. Generations of Canadians for decades to come will recognize the importance of this. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat.
Channel Report. Quebec from the U.S. is vital to ensuring jobs in Canada and our energy security. It's essential for keeping thousands of jobs in both Quebec and Ontario, as well as literally keeping the lights and heat on in both of these provinces. It also provides all the jet fuel for Toronto's Pearson Airport. Its importance to Canada cannot be overstated. What is the Prime Minister doing to ensure that Line 5 is not cancelled?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we take this issue very seriously. Line 5 is vital to our energy security. It supplies Imperial, Shell, and Suncor's refineries in Sarnia. It supplies Suncor's refinery in Montreal and Valero's refinery in Lévis, Quebec. It delivers 66% of the crude oil consumed in Quebec. It also supplies propane to hundreds of thousands of homes in northern Michigan. Businesses and refineries in that state depend on it. I can assure this House we are looking at all our options. Line 5 is a vital pipeline for Canada's energy security, and we support it. Merci.
Member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that wasn't the Prime Minister, and that didn't sound like a very comforting answer. Line 5 survival is not an option. Canada's largest airport needs it. Farming and industrial sectors need it. And our economy, already suffering from the pandemic, cannot afford to shed any more jobs. Now, the Prime Minister has a choice. He can stand up for Line 5's continued safe existence or allow thousands of jobs to disappear and leave millions of Canadians out in the cold and the dark. When's he going to do his job and take real steps to ensure Line 5 and our economic future?
The Honourable Minister.
As I said, Mr. Speaker, we take this issue very seriously. Line 5 is vital to our energy security, and in defending Canada's interests with any country, we take a Team Canada approach, just as we did very successfully with NAFTA. On Line 5, these are improvements to modernize an existing piece of energy infrastructure. It's irresponsible. It serves no one to conflate that with other issues. But I can tell you on this side of the House, we are working responsibly, diligently to support our oil and gas workers, keeping existing treaties in mind, protecting Canada's energy and industrial infrastructure.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisker.
The fact is, American policies are threatening Canadian jobs, and the Prime Minister, through 3 different presidents, has just shrugged his shoulders and let it happen. Whether it's softwood lumber, Keystone XL, Biden's Buy America, and now Line 5, this Prime Minister is failing to stand up for Canadian jobs. While he loves to blame the premiers for his failures, the fact is it's his job to stand up for Canadian jobs. When will the Prime Minister do something to stop the job losses that are coming as a direct result of these U.S. policies?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's irresponsible. It serves no one to conflate Line 5 with Keystone XL or any other project. President Biden's decision to rescind the permit for KXL has no impact on Enbridge's Line 5 or Line 3 replacement projects. These pipelines continue to operate. These are projects to modernize existing energy infrastructure that has been in place since 1953. It's driven by safety and it's driven by good labor jobs. Both of these projects have been repeatedly validated by the U.S. Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, Canada has passed the 20,000 mark for COVID deaths. But Canada's always in reaction mode. There's no border plan and no progress on vaccination. Quebec's ready to vaccinate 250,000 people a week. We know, but we got 0 vaccines last week and very little this week. How is Canada going to get back on track to vaccinate the majority of Canadians by September? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as today is the first day of Black History Month in Canada, I would like to take a moment to recognize the outstanding achievements of the Black community here in Canada and around the world, and to remind the House that I, as Procurement Minister, remain committed to diversity in procurement, including by reaching out to the Black community. In terms of the question being answered, I'm pleased to say that we have vaccines en route to Canada and being deployed across this country on Monday and Tuesday of this week. And we will continue to bring vaccines into this country to meet our quarterly target of 6 million vaccines. And then in Q2, 20 million of approved vaccines.
L'honorable député de Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, it's the same old song every time from this government. They think everything's hunky-dory, but the fact is that Moderna announced on Friday they will be delivering less vaccine than expected. The EU is going to restrict exports. Before our very eyes, Canada is tumbling down in the rankings of national vaccination rates. Seniors, frontline workers, and the vulnerable are waiting. They're the ones who are paying the price. When is the government going to provide the provinces with enough doses to meet their timelines? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for the question. I want to be clear with Canadians as their concerns are completely valid. There is no situation more pressing for our government than ensuring that all Canadians have access to vaccines against COVID-19. The production of these vaccines remains in early stages, and as factories ramp up their production lines, so too will our government be always prepared for the receipt of vaccinations in this country. Canada remains on track to ensure that we have vaccines in this country for every Canadian who chooses to be vaccinated by the end of September 2021. There's no issue more pressing for our government at this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. When it comes to vaccine supply, it's one failure after another. 0 doses of vaccine last week, 80% fewer doses of Pfizer for the first 2 weeks of February, and Moderna is now announcing a 20% drop in the weeks to come. It's a disaster, Mr. Speaker. What's worse, the Prime Minister told us last week that everything was fine. Oh, that's pretty worrisome when you see this government that can't roll out the program properly. It's one failure after another. What guarantees do we have that vaccine deliveries are going to get back on schedule for Quebec and the rest of Canada? The Honourable Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for the question, and as I said, we share the concern of all Canadians to ensure that vaccines come into this country. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we are pleased to announce that the Pfizer vaccines destined for Canada are indeed en route and will be deployed across this country during the course of this week. And from here on in, our vaccine receipts will continue to ramp up so that we can ensure that all Canadians who wish to be vaccinated are so prior to the end of September. This is new technology, Mr. Speaker. These are new times for the industrial world relating to vaccines, and we must all ensure that we remain vigilant while vaccines are being produced.
Honorable député de La Prairie.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. I'm no more reassured. The government says everything's going well, but Quebec has run out of doses. The government says everything's going well, but The Economist says Canada won't finish vaccinating everyone until the summer of 2022. That's 9 months late. The government is telling us that things are going well, but experts everywhere else in the world are looking at the situation and saying things aren't going well in Canada at all. What very concrete steps is the government going to take to get us back on track? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président, nous partageons.
Mr. Speaker, we share the urgency that Canadians are feeling to ensure that vaccines are available as quickly as possible. And our government every day shares that sense of urgency. With over 1.1 million doses already distributed all across the country to date, and with vaccines that remain to be approved, we are in a good position to have 6 million doses by the end of March and 20 million by the end of June and 70 million doses by the end of September. That's our priority. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Families have sacrificed a lot during this pandemic. They've stopped seeing their loved ones, even who live in the same city. The Prime Minister has to do his share. Non-essential flights are still a possibility in Canada. There are countries like New Zealand and Australia that have cancelled all non-essential flights. Why doesn't the Prime Minister stop non-essential flights from taking place in Canada? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, since March of 2020, we've been asking Canadians to not travel during the pandemic. Last week, we announced additional rules on international travel. These are now among the strictest in the world. We've reached an agreement with airlines to suspend all flights to Mexico and the Caribbean until April 30th. Additionally, all travelers will soon have to book 3 nights at a public health-approved quarantine facility upon their return and get tested upon arrival. The health of Canadians will always come first, Mr. Speaker.
I want to remind the honourable members, whether they're asking or answering questions, please make sure that your camera is on and make sure that your microphone is off or is muted while you're not speaking. The honourable member for Burnaby South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Families have had to sacrifice so much during this pandemic. Many families haven't even seen their loved ones living in the same city. The Prime Minister has to do his part as well. It's still possible to take non-essential flights in Canada. While other countries like New Zealand and Australia have stopped all non-essential travel, why hasn't the Prime Minister put in place similar measures here in Canada to stop all non-essential air travel?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I stated earlier, our current rules are among the strictest in the world. We've been calling on all Canadians to avoid non-essential travels. We've reached an agreement with the airlines to suspend all flights that are heading towards most popular vacation destinations. We now have, on top of the measures that we've implemented earlier in the year, we've now implemented new measures that will require all arrivals to be tested and to be quarantined at a designated facility. The health of Canadians is our priority, and we will do whatever it takes to protect Canadians.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, a year after telling Canadians that border controls didn't stop the spread of COVID, the virus is now rampant across Canada, and documents show that the Liberals stalled on imposing travel restrictions at the start of the first wave, again at the beginning of the second wave, when doing so would have saved lives. The Liberals could have put in place a system of rapid testing at airports months ago, but refused this science-based approach. Canada is 2 million doses short of vaccines this week. Will those who are vaccinated be exempt from the Liberals' too late travel restrictions?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleague for her question. As I stated earlier, Canada today has one of the strictest rules in the world for discretionary travel. We have called a year ago on all Canadians to avoid non-essential travel. We've implemented new measures earlier in the year to make sure that all travelers are tested prior to boarding the plane, and now we're implementing new measures. There is no evidence, we still don't have information about the effect of vaccine on transmissibility. Therefore, all Canadians will be subjected to these measures.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
So now the Liberals are saying that even being vaccinated doesn't guarantee an end to restrictions. Canadians have stayed at home. They've washed their hands, they've worn masks, and they've sacrificed a lot. With rapid tests and vaccinations available to the world, but not to us, Canadians shouldn't have to accept more restrictions without a clear end in sight and without that type of a word salad from the minister. How many Canadians will have to be vaccinated before travel restrictions are eased?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I will just say this, the issue of vaccination and travel is a live one. I met with my G7 counterparts last week to talk about standardization of travel, international travel. Of course, my colleague is correct. We know that vaccination saves lives. The science is still unclear yet about what effect it has on transmission. That science is evolving, and we will be sharing the understandings and knowledge of vaccination as it becomes clear with Canada and the world.
L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, On January 29th, the European Union announced a COVID vaccine export permit system. The minister knows full well this could be used to block vaccine shipments to Canada. Nearly 120 countries have been exempted, but guess what? Canada has not. The government claims Canada won't be affected. Can the minister resist the temptation to read her prepared speaking notes and say whether or not vaccine shipments will be blocked? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, we have been reassured that vaccine deliveries will not be interrupted by these new measures taken by the European Union. That's the Prime Minister, that's what he heard from the President of the EU Commission and what our ministers have heard from their counterparts in Europe over the weekend. This is our government's top priority, ensuring that all Canadians who wish to be vaccinated, that they get vaccinated by September. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I understand what the Parliamentary Secretary is saying, but the facts are the facts. Currently, given the blockade that Europe is planning, we don't see Canada among the exempted countries. So the Prime Minister may have had a discussion with the President of the EU, but did he ask for Canada to be included in the exemption list, yes or no? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that there is global competition. It's very intense and ferocious for vaccines, and we all knew there would be one, and that's why Canada entered into contracts with 7 different manufacturers. Over the weekend, when we were discussing with the Vice President of the European Commission, we said that we expect our contracts to be respected, and the Minister of International Trade was reassured by the European counterpart. Shipments to Canada should not be affected by these new measures. The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, on Friday, the European Union announced export controls on COVID-19 vaccines. Considering almost all of our vaccines are produced or shipped from the EU, this could have a significant impact. Despite claims from the Prime Minister and the Trade Minister that Canadians wouldn't be affected by these measures, we are not listed on the EU list as one of the over 100 countries who are exempt. Why?
Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as my colleague heard directly from the Minister earlier today at committee, we have been reassured that vaccine shipments will not be interrupted by these new measures. That is the message the Prime Minister himself received from the President of the EU Commission, and the message that various ministers across government have received from their EU counterparts over the course of this last weekend. Our government's priority remains getting vaccines to Canadians by September, and we will deliver.
The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The point is we're still not on the exemption list. Another issue is we've learned that Belgium, where Canada's Pfizer vaccines are produced and shipped from, is looking at its own export controls. When I asked the minister about this earlier today, she couldn't provide any concrete assurances that Canada wouldn't be affected by Belgium's draft law. What is the minister doing to get ahead of these potential measures, which could affect timelines for Canadians being vaccinated?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as my colleague is well aware, the minister did have conversations with her counterpart in Belgium and did receive reassurances that our shipments would not be affected by these new EU measures. But let me just say that there is intense global competition for vaccines across countries, and we always knew there would be. And that's why Canada secured no less than 7 different vaccine suppliers, and we will continue to deliver vaccines for Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Avignon.
The Honourable Member for Avignon-la-Métis-Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, despite the government's announcement, there's nothing preventing essential flights during the pandemic. All that has changed is that those who want to travel south have to purchase their tickets from an American airline like Delta instead of a Canadian one. Foreign carriers continue to offer discounted vacations. It's good to test travelers when they come back, but doesn't the minister agree that the safest way to prevent the spread is for people not to go on vacation in the first place? Why aren't all non-essential flights by all airlines being banned? The Honourable Minister.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, Canada had already had some of the strictest measures in the world, and those have been strengthened this week. We have agreements with Sunwing, Air Canada, WestJet, Air Transat for no more flights to Mexico and the Caribbean. We're repatriating people. They have to be tested before they take off and on arrival. And if they don't have a negative result, they'll remain in quarantine. So these are very strict measures. And we're telling all Canadians, if you
the honourable member for Carleton. We're not getting any sound. I just wonder if the honourable member for Carleton can just check the mute button there.